start then. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to come watch my presentation on rotator cuff injuries and for supporting my education. So in this presentation today, I will be covering what ISM is, my mentorship and myself, the anatomy and physiology of the rotator cuff, common injuries of the rotator cuff, my end product, which was a mock patient which I diagnosed with a rotator cuff injury, and a special thanks. So I'm actually not a newcomer to this room. Last semester, I also shadowed at UTMB Victory Lakes under Jasmine Zavadi and did my final presentation for that semester in the same spot that I'm standing right now. And that's a picture from last semester. So the ISM stands for Independent Study Mentorship, and it's a relatively difficult class to get into, with only 20 applicants making it out of about 150 to 200 a year. So the main goals of ISM are to gain experience in the chosen field that you picked at the beginning of the year. And to do this, you are required to shadow a mentor that is a professional in that field, and then at the end, create a product, which is a representation synthesis of all the information that you learn through shadowing and through personal research outside of school. Here's Will. So like I said, I am still doing my mentorship here at UTMB Victory Lakes under William Hall, who graduated from Houston Community College and the University of Houston. And during my time here, I shadowed him on Mondays and Thursdays from 3:30 to 5 most weeks. And I was in the Rehabilitation clinic, which is right over here on the 3rd floor. And after a lot of dice rolling and coin tossing, I ended up choosing rotator cuffs as the focus of my research this semester.
It's a good picture, Will.
Yeah, man, it's good. Use it on my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Go back to my picture.
Okay, I guess the About Me slide isn't working, but I am 16 years old and a senior at Clear Lake High School. So I always had a huge interest in the medical field since I was probably about 7, and I watched every medical documentary, every medical TV show under the sky, or really what was on Netflix. And it wasn't really until about 6th grade when I started competitively figure skating when I figured out that I really love physical therapy. And why, you may ask? Well, during my competitive figure skating, I kept getting injured and frequented the physical therapy clinic. Okay, so like I said, my project was on the rotator cuff, which basically holds your arm in place in your shoulder. So the rotator cuff is, medically speaking, it holds your humeral head in your glenohumeral joint. And basically that means that it holds your humerus in your shoulder socket. And it's made out of 4 parts: the subscapularis, the superspinatus, infraspinatus, and the teres minor. So the first muscle that I'm going to be talking about, or muscle tendon system, is the subscapularis, and that is located anterior of the cuff system, a little bit like behind your pectoralis major and your deltoids, and is the only muscle that aids in internal rotation, and along with all the other muscles, it also stabilizes your shoulder. Next is the supraspinatus, and that is located at the top of the system, and it works with abduction and external rotation, and also does dynamic stabilization, working with other muscles. Okay, I guess it's going to do this. All right, well, the third muscle would be the infraspinatus, and that is located in the back near your scapular region, and that works with external rotation as well as stabilization of the shoulder. And the last muscle would be the teres minor, which is located directly below the infraspinatus and also aids in external rotation and stabilization of the shoulder. Okay, so there's a lot of injuries that can happen with your rotator cuff, including tears, impingements, and tendinitis, but I chose to focus this semester on specifically tears. So as I said, there are tears which can be partial or full, and a partial tear of the tendon is damaged but not completely severed from the bone, as it is with a full tear. There's an impingement where the tendons get squished together between the humeral head and the shoulder socket. There's tendinitis, which is when the tendon becomes inflamed, and a subluxation, which is a fancy word for a partial dislocation, and then there's a complete dislocation. So as I said, I would be focusing on tears and specifically the infraspinatus tear. And some of these symptoms include an aching pain that's around your scapular region and ranging down to your bicep. There's shooting pain with external rotation. There's a decreased range of motion in general on the affected side, and then weakness in the arms and shoulder. There's a lot of different ways to diagnose an infraspinatus tear, but mostly a physician will look at the physical form of a patient, and in a tear, they will notice visible muscular atrophy and a protracted scapula due to the weakening of the surrounding muscles of the shoulder. They can also do shoulder and arm manipulations to get a guide for about their range of motion. And then they can also palpate the anterior to the acromion, which is about a little bit off to your collarbone. And whenever the arm is raised, they will be able to feel like any kind of damage or tear to the tendon. And then they can also measure isometric strength of external rotation to get a feel for how their range of motion is. And then if they want to get an idea of how big the tear is, they can also do imaging through MRIs, ultrasounds, or X-rays. There's a lot of treatment options when it comes to an infraspinatus tear, but the first plan of action, no matter the severity of the tear, would be physical therapy because it is the least invasive. And then if a patient feels too much pain where it impedes their daily activities, they would get prescribed some non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And moving on to more invasive procedures, there's an arthroscopy, which is surgery through small incisions in the site with microscopic little cameras to do the surgery. And then there's a mini open surgery, which starts as an arthroscopy and then gets the incision site gets bigger to have more of a view to fix the tear. Okay, so onto my final product. Originally, at the beginning of the semester, I wanted to work with the patient hands-on and create a treatment program and work with them for at least one session where I could really test my knowledge, but I quickly realized that's not legal because I haven't graduated high school yet. So my next plan of action was to use Emily as a mock patient, but I felt like that was too much work on her to have to act and memorize her symptoms and pains. So eventually I ended up doing a mock patient that I created, and his chart should be in the project portfolio if you guys want to see. Oh, his chart's not in the handout, it's in the portfolio. But I basically did a whole chart and write up for him. Okay, so the patient in question, his name is Claudio Revelado. He is a 22-year-old male who is in college and does football and swim competitively. So one day, Claudio came in to his primary physician, and he was having some symptoms that he thought raised some red flags. So he experienced some decreased range of motion on his right arm. He had pain with external rotation. He had a dull aching pain originating around his scapular region and branching down to his bicep. And then he also had just general weakness in his right arm. So after looking at these symptoms, his primary care doctor decided to run some tests. So after looking at Claudio, the doctor noticed some visible muscular atrophy and a protracted scapula, and then proceeded to palpate interior to the acromion and noticed there was like a small, low-grade partial tear. He then ran an isometric strength of external rotation test and determined that his range of motion was decreased severely on the right side, and eventually diagnosed him with a partial tear of the infraspinatus tendon. So now with his diagnosis, Claudio was referred to physical therapy, and with me being his primary physical therapist. So I eventually created a 4-week plan to rehabilitate his shoulder. And the main point of this plan was to, for the first 2 weeks, increase his range of motion, and for the second 2 weeks, increase his strength. So as you can see, a lot of these exercises on here you may be familiar with because they are a lot of the exercises that I saw while shadowing Will during my time this year. So the first week we'll be focusing on mainly increasing the range of motion of his infraspinatus. So the exercises I included were the pendulum, which is you bend over and you move your arm around in circles or back to back, side to side. Wrist flexion to extension, which is just extending and flexing your wrist to get your blood moving. And table slides, which you put your arm on a table and you slide in different directions. And these were kind of the warm-ups to get the patient going. And moving on to harder things, they start doing light external rotation with arm abducted 90 degrees, standing external rotation, bent over horizontal abduction, and internal and external rotation. So all of these diagrams and charts and explanations of how to do these exercises are included in both the handout and portfolio. In the second week, we stuck with the same exercises, but since he was getting moving with this rehabilitation, we decided to add a little bit more reps and a little bit more weight, whether it was through a light resistance band or through a very light free weight that was about 1 to 2 pounds. So as you notice, a lot of these materials that we use for rehabilitation are materials that patients can find in their home easily, such as towels or free weights. Now going into week 3, we start focusing more on the strength increasing. So we took out a little bit of the warm-up and then added more exercises such as the full hand, which is now targeting the subscapularis. And we start working on internal rotation to start strengthening the muscles around the infraspinatus. And doing this, you can decrease the amount of stress that's put on the infraspinatus, which in the long term can lead to less risk of getting another tear. Week 4, we're doing the same exercises, but once again, we're increasing the amount of reps we do and increasing the amount of weight that is added on. So now we're using moderate to heavy resistance bands and a little bit of a heavier weight, so 2 to 3 pounds. And finally, at the end of these 4 weeks, the patient, Claudio, will be reevaluated to see if he needs further physical therapy in the clinic. So at this moment, in the 4 weeks, he's coming to the clinic about 2 times a week to work with the physical therapist to make sure he's engaging in proper form. And then the rest of the days of the week, he's performing his exercises at home 2 times a week. Or no, 2 times a day, 7 days a week. So now we're gonna turn your focus to my portfolio and the handouts. In the portfolio, I compiled all of my research into some infographics that are easy for patients to understand and read. And then also a research paper, which is what I based most of my project on. Also in the portfolio, there's a small handout because I also took into consideration how many rotator cuff injuries I saw while I was with Will. And I just thought it would be good for patients to be able to get a handout and see exactly how the rotator cuff works and why they're going to physical therapy and why they got injured, which may help them prevent further injury or injuries in the future. Now in the handout, which is meant for the patient Claudio. I included the whole treatment plan and then diagrams of the exercises. So if he gets confused, he can read the instructions on how to perform each exercise and then look at the pictures to see if they're making the right movements. So there's no way that the patient can possibly mess up an exercise. And I think that is it. All in all, I would like to thank my coach, who is the facilitator of this program. His name is Coach Penders. I would also like to thank William for letting me shadow him about 2 times a week. I would like to thank Star Stanich for setting me up with this volunteer program, because without her, I would have never found UTMB and be able to experience this. I would also like to thank my parents for supporting me through all of this year and driving me to my mentorship 2 times a week. And then lastly, my audience for taking some time out of their day and listening to my presentation. It means a lot to me. So thank you, everybody. And any questions, comments, or concerns?
So what was your reason for selecting infraspinatus tears?
Well, I knew that this subscapularis was the most common tear, but I didn't want to just do the most common tear because it'd be too easy to find research. So I decided to do the infraspinatus because it was a little bit more of a unique tear. So I wanted to really dig deep into research.
Do you know what the usual mechanism of injury is for infraspinatus tear?
Well, it's in the back, so a lot of overhead sports that have overhead repetitive motion, such as like swimming, which is an overhead sport, and football, which also is an overhead sport. So a lot of those people who do a lot of those sports and have a lot of strain on that muscle, they tend to get